The death of the subculture. When aesthetics replace identity. Welcome to the Threads of Culture, a show that unpacks the evolving landscape of design, branding, and the cultural forces shaping the global stage. Today, we're diving into how algorithm-driven platforms hollowed out subculture, turned identity into content, and left an entire generation performing belonging without ever actually experiencing it. Subcultures used to cost you something. Now, they cost you nothing. And that's exactly the problem. What happens when punk gets reduced to a Pinterest board? When goth becomes a 15-second fit check? When the thing that once gave outcasts a reason to keep going becomes just another filter you scroll past, on your way to the next one? If identity is something you can try on and take off like a costume, does it still mean anything at all? This matters because subcultures were never really about clothes or music. They were systems of belonging. They were the reason lonely, angry, misunderstood people found their people. Strip that function out and you're left with a generation that has more ways to express identity than any generation in history, and record levels of loneliness to show for it. First, we'll trace how subcultures actually worked, what they demanded, and why that cost was the whole point. Then, we'll follow the money and see how fashion and branding systematically strip mine subcultural meaning for profit. And finally, we'll look at how algorithms restructured identity itself and ask whether anything resembling real subculture can survive on the other side. To understand what we've lost, you have to understand what subcultures actually required. Punk didn't start as a look. It started as a refusal. In 1970s Britain, economic collapse and political disillusionment created a generation with nothing to lose and everything to reject. The ripped clothes weren't fashion. They were a material rejection of consumer culture. You made your own zines, your own music, your own venues. CBGBs in New York, the 100 Club in London. These were physical spaces where you showed up, took social risks, and earned your place. If you dressed the part without knowing the music, without living the politics, without putting in the time, you got called a poseur. And that word had teeth. It meant you hadn't paid the price of admission. And the price was real. You could get beaten up for looking like a punk. That danger, that friction, that social cost was inseparable from the meaning. Goth worked the same way. Born in the Batcave in London, rooted in post-punk existentialism, it emphasized individualism, spirituality, introspection. The visual language emerged from the values, not the other way around. Hip-hop, same story. Block parties in the Bronx weren't a marketing strategy. They were a community response to systemic disenfranchisement. Every major subculture of the 20th century followed the same pipeline. Lived experience created community. Community created expression. Expression became visible. And that visibility eventually attracted the mainstream. But the pipeline took years, sometimes decades. During that time, meaning accumulated. Depth accrued. The subculture became dense with shared references, internal hierarchies, inside knowledge. It became a world you could inhabit. Then came Tumblr. Around 2010 to 2015, Tumblr served as a halfway house between the old world and the new. Aesthetics like C-punk, pastel grunge, new goth, and vaporwave were more visual and curatorial than their predecessors, but they were still tethered to cultural reference. Music, film, art, and critically, hopping from aesthetic to aesthetic was not looked upon fondly. There was still a social norm of commitment. Vaporwave is the perfect edge case. It had a visual language, the glitch art, the Roman busts, the dead mall imagery. But it also had a genuine ideological core. It was a critique of consumer capitalism. Nostalgia treated as commodity. The uncanny valley of corporate aesthetics. For a brief moment, it proved that online-born culture could function like a real subculture. And then, its critical framework got discarded, and its Fiji water and marble busts became phone cases at Urban Outfitters. That's the transition point. That's where the strip mining begins. And the fashion industry has turned it into a science. Hypebeast made an observation a few years ago that crystallizes this perfectly. Most designers, they noted, systematically scroll through Wikipedia's category subcultures entry by entry, hunting for inspiration for their next collection. Not engaging with communities, not spending time in scenes. Scrolling a Wikipedia page like it's a catalog. Subcultures treated as an inexhaustible power source rather than living, breathing communities of people. This isn't new behavior exactly. Vivienne Westwood pulled from punk. Marc Jacobs pulled from grunge. But the old version at least had a timeline. A subculture existed for years. It developed a rich visual language. The mainstream eventually noticed. Designers reinterpreted. There was lag. There was respect, even if it was grudging. Now the pipeline is compressed to almost nothing. An aesthetic appears on TikTok, goes viral within days. Brands produce it within weeks, and it's dead within a month. There's no time for meaning to accrue. The subculture is born pre-commodified. Consider Coquette. It emerged on TikTok in 2022. No geographic anchor, no musical tradition, no ideological framework whatsoever. It was defined entirely by visual markers. Bows, pink, lace, a performed femininity drawn from existing archetypes of beauty and wealth. Coquette required nothing of its participants except a shopping list. It could be adopted in minutes and discarded without consequence. Punk changed how people lived. Coquette changed how people shopped. That distinction is everything. 91% of Gen Z say they don't fit neatly into traditional identity categories. That sounds like freedom. And in some ways, it is. The old model of subcultures included real toxicity, racism, sexism, rigid hierarchies. Punk scenes were often aggressively white and male. The democratization of aesthetic access has genuinely made self-expression more available to people who would have been shut out of physical subcultures. That's a real gain. But look at what the algorithms have done with that fluidity. TikTok and Pinterest don't reward commitment. They reward switching. Their machine learning systems predict virality, serve novelty, and transform fashion from a slow evolution into a sprint through microtrends that barely last long enough to name. The algorithm doesn't care if you go deep. It wants you to go wide. And so, identity becomes a feed, not a foundation. Meanwhile, the physical infrastructure that once made subcultures possible is vanishing. The UK loses grassroots music venues at an alarming rate. The Batcave is long gone. CBGBs became a John Varvatos store. Warehouse spaces get swallowed by real estate economics. These weren't just places to hear music. They were the social architecture of belonging. Without rooms where strangers become communities through shared risk and shared experience, you can't generate subculture. You can only generate content. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The Aesthetics Wiki, that sprawling online catalog of every conceivable core and wave, now has hundreds of entries. Cottagecore, Goblin Core, Dark Academia, Light Academia, Tomato Girl, Vanilla Girl. The sheer volume tells you everything. When there are that many subcultures, none of them can function as one. They're costumes in a wardrobe, not worlds you inhabit. And Gen Z, the generation with the most tools for self-expression in human history, reports the highest levels of loneliness on record. That correlation deserves scrutiny, not dismissal. Aesthetic belonging doesn't work the same way as the real thing. You can dress cottagecore without knowing a single other person who does. You can perform an identity in perfect isolation. The visual expression came first. Community became optional. Lived experience became irrelevant. The pipeline didn't just compress. It reversed. So is this really the death of the subculture? Maybe what died isn't the impulse. The impulse to belong, to rebel, to find your people? That's as human as breathing. What died is the infrastructure, the venues, the time, the friction, the cost. We optimized identity for visual consumption and stripped out the part that actually made people feel less alone. Was there a subculture that genuinely changed how you moved through the world? Not a look you tried on, a world you actually lived in. Tell me about it. I want to hear the real ones, not the aesthetic. Send it to someone who cycled through 4 aesthetics this year and ask them how that's going. Until next time, this has been The Threads of Culture.